Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gary Parker, and I'm going to be your host presenter for today. Thank you all for logging in. We've had quite a few registrations for this afternoon, so I will give people approximately 2 minutes, and then we will start in respect for people who've logged in on time. Could I ask people as well, if you, while the presentation is going on, if you can put yourself on mute, please, so we don't get any background noise. There's going to be quite a few people on this afternoon, and obviously we want people to hear this. There will be, I'm going to share a presentation, and then after the presentation is finished, we will email everybody who registered with us a copy of a summary presentation, which is free. You can, there's a number of other offers on that. You can buy the full presentation offers, but the free presentation is around about 20 slides, so it is considerable. And if you want the other presentation, the information about that will be on the email you're going to get after this. So while we're waiting, as I say, my name is Gary Parker. I'm from an organisation called CNT, which is short for Community Network Training. As you can probably hear from my accent, I am from Preston. So I am from Lancashire myself, although at this moment I'm actually in London, because our company has offices in London and in Preston, although for obvious reasons I haven't been there as much as I would like. And I'm also a supporter of Preston North End, so I hope you don't hold that against me. But hopefully we'll be back to more winning ways soon. So I'm going to start very shortly then. Today, what we're talking about today and what I'm presenting on is bid writing, bid and application writing, and a number of elements of this. Obviously, this is an hour, so you will get an overview of this. I'd also like to thank Lucy Jones from NHS for facilitating this, and she's going to say a few words at the end. The other thing, and the details are on a presentation, we have got, our company's got a YouTube channel, which is free. So if you want to subscribe to that, that would help us. But also there is the full hour of a previous bid writing session on there that you can watch as well. But we will be recording this, and we may put this on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be identified personally for any reason, if you can switch the camera off, because you'll still be able to see it, and any other distinguishing marks. If that's an issue for you, then contact us, because we can take action on that before we put it on YouTube, and we don't want to compromise anybody's personal safety or security. As I say, the reason we do that is so we can have wider circulation of this free of charge on our YouTube channel. Okay, I'm going to start now. People are still logging in, but we need to get on with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a presentation about the main elements of how to write a funding application. Just to explain a little bit more about my background. I've been doing this kind of work for many years, and it's something that you can learn. You know, there's no such thing as a born bid writer. It is detailed. It can be boring, but it is obviously essential work. And you can learn this yourself. You can write a lot of applications, and sooner or later they will succeed and you'll pick up the skills. So basically what we're looking at is ways to shortcut that and some best practice in this hour, but it's basically an overview. I've sort of already been through the domestics. It will take about an hour. We will be recording this. You will be able to ask questions or put any comments in the chat as well. Obviously, other people can access the chat. So again, if you don't want that to happen, best not to put your details in the chat. If you want to ask a question at the end, I'm quite happy about that. Or you can email us after the event if you wish, whatever is best for you. So a bit more about me. Our company has been around since 2003, so we're not a new organisation. We do three things. We do business support. We do a lot of work for non-profits, including helping to set up non-profit making organisations and social enterprises. We also do a lot of fundraising and bid writing work. And we also do a lot of training related to all of those elements that I've just mentioned. We are members of the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, which is a professional body, and we work regularly for many organisations delivering funding courses, researching funding sources and writing applications. So we've got a lot of skills and experience here. There are my contact details, also the YouTube channel information as well. There'll be more about that later. What are we going to cover today? The two main elements of bid writing fundraising. First is finding the right funding, because obviously if you don't know where to find it, then it becomes more difficult to even write a bid in the first place. And you need to do your research, and then we're going to look at some of the elements of submitting a quality application, and then we're going to look at some of the issues around bid writing, particularly in the social and community sector, around equalities, social impact and other related issues. And then we're going to have a very, very mini bid writing workshops. Unfortunately, you won't get a chance to do that today because it's a bit difficult using this format, but what you will get is a lot of the sort of base information to help you. So here are my 5 top tips, and we go through some right at the end. From what I can gather, a lot of you are fairly new or small organisations, and this has come from a lot of experience working with organisations. Decide the direction of your project organisation and then look for funding to support it, not vice versa, because if you just chase money, that's going to be difficult anyway, and you may end up going outside your main focus, and there's a lot of inherent difficulties in this without going into a lot of detail. So it's better to decide on your short, medium and long-term direction and then look for funding to support that appropriately. Second top tip is to research the funders. This is bid writing. As I said earlier, you're not a born bid writer, it's a skill you can pick up. But they say that it's 75% research, 20% bid writing skill, and 5% luck in successful bid writing. So the research is very important. We're going to look at that shortly. The second is to, depending on how big or small your project is, to develop a project plan or outline. And then from that, develop a model application. That's an outline application from which you can develop other applications. Again, we'll look a bit more about that later, because it's a base bid that you build on. You can take certain elements from it, whether it's the background of your organization or what your project is, whatever, and you can use that to populate other applications. So it's very important to have a base or core application. The other final top tip is be persistent. Bid writing takes time. It's not an exact science. Nobody can predict whether a bid's going to succeed or not. And that's what often happens with us. We write bids we think will succeed. Sometimes they don't. And then on other occasions, we write bids that we don't think have got as much chance as others, and they succeed. So it does take persistence on this. And you've got to really do it, or find people within your organisation or group that can do it on a long-term basis if possible. That may not be easy, but of course, if you do pick up this skill, it's quite a skill that's in demand at the moment because of competition for funding. So it does open up some other opportunities as well. Okay, we'll move on now. The first thing we're going to do is look at the types of funding that are out there. I put these basically into 6 groups. You know, you could split these down even more, but for the purposes of this, you've got grant-making trusts and foundations, charitable trusts of various types, of which are a lot in the UK. Then you've got statutory funding, local, regional, national government, and a range of others. I put Euro in there, but because there's still some European funding around at the moment, probably not for much longer. And then you've got community fundraising of various types, community organisations, and then there's other things these days like crowdfunding, which I'm not going to say too much about today, but that's something we are familiar with here. And then, of course, you've got the lottery funds, which everybody knows about, large and small. There are several groups of those, ranging from Awards for All, which is the smallest one, it's 10,000, up to much bigger funds like Reaching Communities, which is up to £500,000. Then you've got the private sector, various charitable trusts and others from large companies. And finally, you've got what's called social investment. What that is, it's either grants or loans with strings attached. It might be, or conditions attached. It might be a social condition to, work with a particular group or whatever. It could be a financial condition where you get rewarded for achieving certain targets. Whichever way, these are kind of social investment programs, and some these days are also part grant, part loan programs as well. I've just been doing some work in community transport, and that's very much to the fore in that particular area. So social investment is something that has grown in the past few years, but it's not as prominent as it looked to become a few years ago, but it's still there. So what do you know about these? So let's have a look at them. Grant-making trusts and foundations, that's charitable trusts of various types. They've specifically established to distribute funds to community groups and good causes. There's a significant number of trusts in the UK. Basically, it must be charitable activity, and within the criteria in their trustee, that's their governing document, they have to make grants related to that. So, these vary from very small grants, £250 to £500,000 plus. The biggest grants, because I'm going to mention these in a while, I think the biggest grants, so there are some charitable trusts that make grants of up to £3 million, maybe more in some cases that I've seen. Assessments times can vary. Some particularly smaller ones are quite quick, but the average is 3 months to 1 year in some cases. There are reasons for that, but I'm not going to go into that today. But so the assessment times, if you're writing a bid, I would allow at least 3 months for a response. Even the lottery, which is very quick, by the time your application has succeeded and you've been notified and you get the money in your account, you're probably talking at least 3 months there, unless it's some very small grants from recently. Grant making trusts and foundations like projects which make money go further by levering in other funds. So what that means is if you can get match funding from other places, they like that, but that's not compulsory, and many funders don't like that, and or are not concerned with that. The lottery, for example, they don't require you to have match funding. It's just that there are some advantages with some trusts, and some stipulate it. Larger trusts may be prepared to take risks and support hard to fund projects. There are some funders out there that have been especially established to do this. There's a couple of websites here that I put here. There's one called My Funding Central, which is free to smaller organisations, but for larger ones you have to pay. There's a lot of information. They're not a funder, but it's a gateway website to a lot of other funders. The other one I put on there is the Global Fund for Women. They fund projects all over the world that are led by women or support organisations that support women. But again, with that one, you need to check it out, because they do vary from regularly who they will fund and where they will fund it, because they fund projects internationally. Who are the biggest charitable funders and how much do they give out? There is a list of top funders around. You can Google that. They give out approximately £5 billion a year, and they they do range. The biggest one in Britain is the Wellcome Foundation, or the Wellcome Trust, which does fund health, research and activities, and they give out over £700 million a year. The Wellcome Foundation is a big drug company and is advising the government about the pandemic at the moment, so they're not short of resources. But there's 14 or 15 different programs on their site. Unusually, they do fund, non-profit making groups and charities, but they also fund individuals and even private companies in some cases, depending on the project. So that's one that's definitely worth checking out. But there is a list of 500 top charities. That's on an organisation called the Directory of Social Change's website, if anybody wants to check that out, which is a very good non-profit making organisation. Move on now, statutory funding. So that's local government, health authorities, European funds, etc. Grants are given to further the statutory funders' objectives, so that if they want to support a certain section in the community, in a local authority area, for example, they will put out a funding call to do that. In the past, they've done it in other ways. They've just had a general funding call and invited people to submit project applications, and they would review them and possibly fund them. But these days, everything seems to be targeted to, or mostly targeted to achieve aims in local, regional, national communities, whatever they are. And the grants are given to further the statutory funders' objectives. Larger and longer grants than trusts usually are more likely to fund core costs, although many charitable trusts will fund core costs. as well, but it depends on the circumstances. What they are, though, is more bureaucratic and inflexible. They have terms and conditions that you have to adhere to in the bidding process and also in the delivery process, and that's it, really. And if you don't adhere to them, that can be an issue sometimes. The application processes can sometimes be complicated and drawn out with more than one stage. I think in recent years there's been a trend towards this. Short initial applications, and then these get sifted, and then the second round is a more detailed application. But one thing you should be aware of, just as you get into the second round, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get funded, because often people are under that misapprehension. In some cases, again, it does depend on who the funding organisation or agency is, and how they view things. But they'll usually have guidelines and support for applicants. So they'll issue guidance notes, and often these days they will have an online forum where people can ask them questions about the application, which is always very useful. But that's the larger ones. Smaller ones, particularly in the charitable sector, don't necessarily do that. You have an application form and that is it. But normally with statutory organisations, because they're better organised and better funded, they can go through the processes I've just detailed. Again, would you look for information about this? Obviously Lucy's here, so you might want to talk to Lucy and her colleagues, or other agencies you deal with. There's some websites there. myfundingcentral.co.uk I've already mentioned, will give information about these. Grants Online is another good site. I mean, that is a part pay, part free website, but you can get information about the funders. It's one that we use, and I would recommend that, because for a small organisation, it costs about £150 a year, but it is very comprehensive and well worth looking at. But you can get sight of all the information on it free of charge. You just need to check it out. The other, of course, is the government's website, gov.uk. That's all government services online, and if you just search for funding or community funding, a whole number of links will come up on that site. The next group of funders are lottery funds. Again, there are quite a lot of these, and they do change a lot. These range from general funds like Awards for All, and the National Lottery Community Fund, as it's now called, some of the larger elements of that. And they also fund some projects in specialist areas. So, for example, for artists and creative industries, they give a certain amount of funding to the Arts Council, who distribute it on behalf of the lottery. For heritage projects, it's the same. They go to the Heritage Lottery fund. And then finally, for sport and related activities, you've got Sport England and the regional bodies that distribute, because there's a regional body for Sport England in the Northwest, on the Active Communities programme, and they distribute funds there. That's the website of the lottery, because they keep changing the address, but that's the current one, tnlcommunityfund.org.uk. Companies, I'm not going to say too much about this, because for very small groups and new groups, they're not particularly useful. There are they only usually give small amounts of money. There are exceptions, like the Wellcome Foundation, which is a business, although the foundation is non-profit making, but most companies tend to operate what's called CSR, corporate social responsibility. Most of the bigger ones, or the big banks, do that. And some of them, for example, Lloyds TSB, have a charitable trust foundation, which is very good and does a lot of good work. But I'm not going to say too much about this, because I don't think it's too relevant for the groups that are here today. Crowdfunding is the other area that I mentioned. How this works, it's a new form of pledge funding or donations. The best known site probably in the UK is crowdfunder.co.uk. And how it works in 2 minutes is that you put up a project online and then you invite people to pledge money to it. You can offer people rewards as well, although obviously not in cash, because the idea is to generate donations. But you can provide, offer people rewards, whatever they are. I mean, for example, in creative industries, they offer people tickets to events, other opportunities to go to do active work with them, like painting or whatever, or acting or music or drama. So my advice is to look at crowdfunder.co.uk and look at the projects on there, similar projects to yours, and see if that's right for you. They also encourage you to make a short video, and by short I mean 2 minutes, because there's a lot of organizations on these sites, and if you make it longer than that, it's unlikely that people will look at it. The other thing you need to do with crowdfunding is you need to generate your own publicity through your social media or whatever links you've got, and get people to share the information about your crowdfunding ask, because of course if people don't know it, they can't contribute to it, and you can share the links, etc. And the more successful non-profit making organizations that do this get their social media and other promotional activities prepared well in advance of it actually going on the crowdfunding platform. But again, if anybody wants to know more about that, I can talk to them offline about it. So we'll move on. Here's some other sources of support. Gov.uk business finance support, that gives a lot of information about grant funding throughout the UK. It is more obviously focused towards businesses, but there are a few social enterprises on here today. And then some others, Social Enterprise UK, they do have, I had a meeting with the chief executive last week who went to the University of Central Lancs and knows Preston well. He told me that there is a local organisation in Lancs that supports the social enterprise development work. So check the Social Enterprise UK website out for that. And any social enterprises out there, I would really recommend you join Social Enterprise UK. I think it's free at the moment, but if it isn't, it's normally about £75 a year or thereabouts, but it has been free during the pandemic. But they have some very, very good networks. I know because I work with organisations in some of them, and I've been a member for a long time, so it really works. We're going to move on now. If you're looking for capital funding, that's funding for buildings, premises, etc. Here, I'm going to go through this because I want to get to the bid writing bit soon. The National Lottery Community Fund has a strand, but it is postcode limited to disadvantaged areas, but you can bid for up to £500,000 or up to £50,000 on the normal revenue bid. Another one called the Garfield Weston Foundation, which is a very large charity, but this is for charities only. Again, they will field capital funding bids, and they have, at least in theory, unlimited grants, but they're very well funded. The Henry Smith charity is another one. You don't have to just be a charity on that, but they will fund both capital funding, which is for premises, buildings, etc., and some capital items, even other things like minibuses that they consider as capital items. There's another one, the Bernard Sunley Trust there. These are a number, because there's lots and lots of these revenue funding sources. That's for funding for projects that all the development funding, including running costs and salaries in some cases, but that's the larger ones. Awards for Alls there. the Wellcome Trust, that's the organisation I mentioned. They will fund that Henry Smith charity. You can go on My Funding Central as well, or Grants Online, because there's lots of revenue funding organisations on that. Okay, so you've identified funding for your project. Then you look to write the bid. So where do you start? Again, here's some initial steps. Remember first, the gap between success and failure in this area is very slight. It's a bit like the Grand National, where you've got a crowded field. It's not an inclusive process. It's designed to knock you out. But if you can get ahead and keep ahead, the chances are you will get funded. So detail is important. Get somebody to proofread your work. My colleague who's sat opposite me, we read each other's work regularly, because it gives you a perspective on it. They can often pick up slight mistakes you might not have noticed. But the other thing is, if they don't know anything about it, especially, if they understand it, you're on the right track, because you've got to make it understandable. Keep it simple, because remember, the bid writer may not know anything about your project. And if it's too complex with too many strands, they may not understand it. But if your colleagues understand it, especially ones that have not been involved in it, then you're doing your job. Many bids fail for two reasons, which are quite simple. Number one is people don't submit them on time. You'll be surprised at the number of applicants that don't do that. So it will not get considered even if you're a few minutes late, especially online applications. That's it. Cut-off date has gone. And the other reason is, in some cases, people don't sign the bids where that's required. Why is that? Because often they have terms and conditions that are legally binding. So if you're not signed up to those, then they will not accept the application. And of course, it's another way of sifting you out. It's like I said, this is not, it's like a job interview. It's not designed to be inclusive. It's designed to sift people out. So it's exactly the same with bid writing, and you always have to keep that in mind. You need to develop most projects, most funding applications are about projects. There are some core funding organisations which will fund organisations for what they do, but I'm not concentrating on that today, because that's only probably about 10% of all funders. 90% want a project. For whatever reason, that might be their remit, for example, to work with young people, to work with other people who've got health problems, whatever it is. So if that's their remit, they want to see projects that will focus on that area. So before you begin, decide on your project idea. What does your project wish to achieve? Who will be the beneficiaries? Who will receive your services? What services will you offer? And then, of course, what area will you work in? I mean, it could be an entire area, it could be the whole of Lancashire, it could be a borough within Lancashire, it could be a local neighbourhood area. But you have to decide on that, and you will probably have to define that within the application usually. So again, those are preparatory actions that you need to take into account. And then you need to look at activities. These are descriptions of individual steps required to achieve objectives. So I've given one here. This is in relation to a training course. 5 12-week courses, each comprising 1 hour of individual guided learning sessions, for 1 hour group sessions, or 1 hour tutorials, etc., etc. So you put in your activities, whatever they are. The other thing, if you've got a project that you're delivering in an area, you might want to, and sometimes they'll ask you anyway, put in how many people will receive these services. Certainly on lottery applications, it's advisable to do that. So you might be over a year, you might provide activities or services for 200 people or whatever the number is. It's usually good to define the number and then also say what services they're going to receive, what they're going to do if they're doing activities, etc., etc. Because then that clarifies it for the funder what exactly they're going to be funding. If you don't put up that in, it's going to make it much more difficult. Resources, obviously you've got to put this in. These are usually defined in budgets, but you'll probably have to write them as well, like who the staff are for the project or how you're going to recruit them. Premises, volunteers, materials, if you need materials of any, and I'm talking about resource materials, so it could be training materials, etc. Or if it's something more active, it could be material resources, whatever. And then, of course, administrative support, because most funders will allow you to put in something for administrative support. Then you've got your outputs. An output is something that is delivered, it's factual and quantitative and must relate to the objectives. So there is a difference between outputs, that's what you're actually going to do, and the outcomes, which are what impact those outputs have. So if you deliver a training course or deliver a service, what's the outcome is what the impact is in the community. Again, I'm not going too much into detail about this today because it would need a lot more time. The details need to be purely factual and quantitative. So it could be, for example, here in terms of the training course, 35 trainees completed a level 1 course, 36 weeks of training undertaken, with an average attendance of 18 young people. So they are the outputs of the actual course. Outcomes, as I've just said, describe the expected changes that will take place for the people who use the service, and indeed sometimes the wider communities. So if it, for example, easiest one, if it was a project that supported people with COVID, obviously it would benefit them personally by improving their health, but it would also the outcome in the community would be less COVID in the community. And there may be quality changes because of that. It might have other impacts or other anticipated changes. So here's some other ones. For example, if you were delivering literacy skills, improve literacy skills amongst the target group in the target boroughs. So it could be improving literacy skills of Afghan refugees in the Preston area, or increase English skills in 90% of refugee children completing courses. They are outcomes of the outputs we've described previously. Your outcomes should reflect your aim, so whatever the aim of your project is, and you should be able to monitor and measure them in some way. So if you say you're going to work with 200 people to improve their health, you should be able to find some ways to monitor and measure that in whatever way is applicable. And you should evaluate the outcomes of the project and use the finding to improve services. These days, that's often called a learning report. But on very big projects, funders often fund learning reports because they want to disseminate it elsewhere. But on any project, you should be evaluating it and getting feedback from the service users, either personally or online or through other methods from other groups you've been working with, and using that to improve your services. Because if you put that in an application, that will also enhance your chances of getting funding at a later stage. So monitoring and evaluation, again, is quite important. We're not talking about that too much today, but I just wanted to underline that. One of the other issues out there is funders will not just take your word for it. So you need to back up your case for funding. You need to make the case for funding. One of the ways of doing that is by proving the need for the project you are developing. Where do you get the relevant statistical information regarding your organisation? How can you collate it? What are the sources of information? Those are all things that you can do. I mean, obviously with health projects, you can talk to the NHS. I don't know whether Lucy puts stats out there or her department, but there's certainly a whole number of official sources you can get information from as well. So your own business or organisation subject to the Data Protection Act. Remember, with data, you know, that there are rules and regulations about this. Your local authority, you know, so if you're in Preston, it will be preston.gov.uk, and the NHS and clinical commissioning groups. Also, another big source of information on everything is the government's Office for National Statistics, which I would recommend people to look at their website and subscribe for it. I subscribe to some information from it, and I get an email every day. The stuff they produce is very, very significant. And you can get information about many, many issues, both locally and nationally, that will back up the case for you delivering services. Of course, you can collect your own statistics. That's why I'm talking about evaluation and monitoring being very important. You can conduct your own surveys. For example, you can use SurveyMonkey to ask up to 10 free questions to anybody, and there are many other online statistical surveying tools that you can download for free these days, and utilize, subject to data provision. Right, here are some key points of submitting a quality application. First, do you need to register your interests? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Sometimes, and these are usually for bigger funds, you might end up having to submit what's called a PQQ, which is a pre-qualification questionnaire or expression of interest, which is a kind of like a mini proposal. Excuse me. Sometimes they ask what your for information about your organisation. For example, have you got a safeguarding policy, things like that. You might even have to produce that as part of the initial application. The reason they do this is so that organisations are able to provide the requirements of the funders in terms of policy and support. Because, for example, if you're working with vulnerable groups and you haven't got a safeguarding policy, that can be an issue. So for bigger funders, they will usually have some kind of initial process, but not always. You need to read the prospectus or guidelines carefully and ensure you have suitable systems in place. And the other thing is apply for a budget you can cope for. If you're a new group and you applied for the lottery, don't apply for the maximum amount because you're unlikely to get it. My advice is start off with awards for all, which is up to £10,000, and they won't. It won't be an issue if you're a new group, and even if you haven't got any accounts or anything like that, it's not a problem for smaller funds. But for larger funds, it could be. Clarity, you've got to explain how projects fit the funders' priorities. That's very important. I've been working with a charity recently that supports people that have got a particular type of heart disease, and there are some funders for this, but they ask very specific questions related to the work that the organisations do in relation to heart disease and what support they give in the community, etc., etc. So your application has got to fit in with the funders' priorities and target groups. You've got to answer all parts of each section clearly, because if it says these days many applications are word limited, so what you probably need to do is you need to write a longer application and edit it down. You might have to edit 500 words down to 200 words in many sections, or even less in some I've done some applications recently where you have to sum a project up in 50 words. That's not easy. I'd rather do it in 5,000 words, but because at least you can get everything in there, because it's hard editing it and knowing what to leave out. So you should be aware of that, but that's a very common trend these days. Quantify any outputs clearly. So whatever you're delivering, how many people, etc., you've got to quantify that. You can use bullet points, you know, particularly if you've got 200 words to sum things up in, use bullet points. Type your application. As it says there, handwrite it clearly. There's very few handwritten applications these days. There's still some around, particularly for some charities will accept them. Here's some more good practice. Read the whole form before you start. Fill in all the straightforward sections first, so all the easy parts. Ensure that all those involved with delivery and monitoring of the project have a hand in writing the application. So that's quite important. And if you're working in a larger organisation, ensure that managers have ownership in the project, even if they're not writing it. They need to okay the direction and what could be delivered. Because if you get the funding and they haven't done, that could be a problem, and there might be issues you're not aware of. So it's very important to keep all the stakeholders in your organisation engaged, particularly when we're writing larger bids, but smaller ones, some of that may not apply. Good practice again, share the first draft with a colleague, get them to read it, test the clarity of the aims and objectives by presenting it to them. If you have answered the questions fully, stop writing. You're not obliged to fill up each text box, you know, saying, but normally these days they keep it down to a word limit, particularly for smaller applications. So I'm going to show you an easy system on how to write a core bid. I call it my 10 ideas system. And this is a very basic way to write an application. So basically you have 10 ideas and that equals 400 words. So that's 20 sentences of 20 words each on average. And each idea, whatever it is, should consist of 2 sentences with 20 words each. So the first statement is, the first sentence is a statement of whatever it is, and then the second sentence is evidence to back that up. Basically, you can start with an initial bullet point and develop it into an idea. So I'm going to show you one. From the bullet point, you can write 2 sentences. The first says a statement, and then evidence to back it up. So that can be from research, it can be from your organization's experience, it can be from whoever you have consulted, or it can be signposting to something else. And here's an example. We want to provide childcare support alongside the training program. So that is 6 words. So sentence 1 is, we will provide creche and childcare support for students and their dependents that will run alongside the training course. That's 19 words. And then previous research shows that this helps to be available both before and after training to ensure full commitment. And you can put in some kind of linked reference to another document to keep it within the 20 words. So you see what I've done there? I've made a statement. We will provide this service as part of the project, and we're backing it up with evidence from our own internally. It's as simple as that, but it could be external evidence as well. It doesn't have to be internal, but you make the first sentence is a statement, and then the second sentence is you're backing it up. And you do 10 of those, which is 20 sentences, and you've got a core bid. So other issues to consider. Again, these days, there are a whole range of other things to consider. One is equalities, which is very important. The second is and diversity. The second is social impact. And then you have a number of what are called cross-cutting themes. So that's things like sustainability and climate change these days. And then there's other issues like added value, which I'll talk about, and avoiding some common mistakes. So how you've got to really consider when you're delivering any project of how groups are impacted. Under equalities law, there's 7 strands of equalities, which I've detailed there, and 9 what they call protected characteristics, including age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, etc. We live in a very diverse community in the UK. So you need to think what the project will do to promote diversity and equal opportunities, and what the project will do to ensure equality of opportunity. Equal access to services is also important these days. So these are quite important things you've got to take into account. Unfortunately, I haven't got the time to talk more about them today, or I would do, but you should try and ensure wherever possible that this is a core part of your application, and take into account the impact of it and access to services for groups that might find that more difficult in normal circumstances. So here are some common mistakes. Huge numbers of funding applications are ineligible, mostly due to not reading the guidance properly. So I can say that earlier, read the guidance properly, because if you're not eligible to apply, for example, or the date has passed for applying, then that's going to lead to a lot of wasted time. So always read the application. Applications take a lot of guidance, rather. Applications take a lot of time and energy, so don't waste it through carelessness. This was some research I did on a London-based program a few years ago. 203 applications out of 534 were ineligible in a previous round. 137 were due to not providing the correct financial information. We're not talking about budgets today, simply because we haven't got the time in an hour. That will be another one. But what kind of information was incorrect? Incomplete last annual accounts. So if you're a new organisation, you have to usually provide an estimate for 1 year of your potential income and potential expenditure. But if you've been around for more than 1 year, you'll be expected to have a set of accounts, and you need to make sure that they are done properly. Another one was no bank account details given. So obviously, if you're not doing that, they can't pay you. But this particular fund was supported by big accountancy firms. So, you know, finances they take very seriously. Other reasons including organisations weren't eligible for various reasons, asked for too much money, because some funders operate what's called procurement rules. So in other words, they're unlikely to give you more than 40% of your annual income or estimated income. So especially if you're a new organisation, you really need to take that into account. Other reasons for failure were didn't state the project actions, so what the project was actually going to do and deliver, because I suspect it was more about the organisation itself, but many funders are more interested in what you've got to offer in terms of delivery rather than what your organisation is or what its ethos is. So you really do need to take those into account. Awards for all, again, this was off around a few years ago, but 74% of applications were ineligible. The main problems were missing bank account details, because this is not an inclusive process, like I said earlier, so they will throw it out or delay it. You have to provide referees in some cases, although now you just have to have two either board members or a range of other leading members, like, for example, directors of a company. And usually with company directors, you're talking about at least 3. And indeed for a charity or non-profit making group as well, it's 3 as well. And then there's personal information, because what they do on awards for all is essentially they credit check the people who are the lead applicants. So unless you give your date of birth, etc., it's not going to succeed. But this is very basic stuff which you can easily avoid. But it does significantly increase your chances of getting the funding, believe you me. Finally, I'm going to give you 10 top tips and related information. Use these for reference, please. But remember, it takes time to build up these skills, and there are many sources of help to support your work out there. So the first one is it's essential that the funding criteria is carefully read before deciding whether to apply. So you've got to read the guidelines. You know, that is very, very important. No matter how short or long they are, read the guidelines, and that will clarify things. And if you're not sure, then ask the people who produced it, because if they've got guidelines, there's usually somebody around who's involved in them or written them. Secondly, make sure that you think through exactly how the project will be managed and how the work will progress. You know, that's the way you manage and deliver the project. Like I said right at the beginning, that's very important to develop your project outline. Make sure you are clear about the funding conditions and that you're able to meet these. So, like, for example, with awards for, you've got to deliver that project within 1 year, or you might be eligible to return all the money if you don't. So you've got to make sure you can deliver the project in whatever timescale either the funder wants or indeed you detail, although if it's not mandatory, you might get an extension. But certainly funders that stipulate a time period and want it delivered within that period. Funders are increasingly likely to ask what difference your service will make to people's lives. So we've talked about that. That is the outcomes or the impacts, often called social impact these days. If you can detail that, then that is a very, very powerful case for succeeding. It's advisable to have an exit strategy. That's point 5. How will your project continue after the funding? Because it's probably more likely to make the funders fund you if you've got a strategy for continuation, even without their funding. So there are many ways to do it. It could be online, it could be through volunteers if activities are not being funded. There could be other exit or succession strategies that you've identified. But think about that one, because that really does enhance your chances of not only getting funded the first time, but to get continuation funding. Make sure.
Sorry, Gary, could you just mute Aaron, because we're really struggling to hear.
Sorry.
Would you just mute? Thank you. Mute Aaron, because he's struggling to hear.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're going on to point 7. Make sure you provide any evidence which can support your application. So that could be research. It could be other information that you have already got from your own research, or it could be from partner organisations. You know, there are many sources of evidence you can cite, and any local, national reports, etc., etc. Any data, community consultation, research, social impact evidence, as I've just said previously, is very, very important. So if you can utilize that, even if it's only one sentence, or say you've got your own evidence base that can be available to the funder if they wish to review it, is quite important. Number 9, the financial information stroke budget you provide must be complete and correct. So if you've got a budget that's £10,000, it needs to add up to £10,000, and you need to detail all the elements of it. And finally, make sure, if this is applicable, and these days you can do electronic signatures as well, make sure the application is signed by the relevant and appropriate persons. And indeed, that is a condition of funding as well on many funders, because, for example, the lottery do that. They ask you to sign a declaration at the end of your application to say who you are and that you have written the bid. So the next steps, just to finish off, start by working on short applications to build your skills and confidence. It's better to write 10 small applications because law of average is more likely to succeed rather than writing one very large bid, which may have less of a chance. If your organisation does not have a track record, it will be difficult at first, but it's not impossible, and there are some funders who will actively support that. The Awards for All Stranded Lottery is one of them, but there are many other smaller charitable trust funders and others who will support organisations. What you've got to focus on, if you've not got a track record, is the people behind it, what your skills and abilities and track record are. It's rather like businesses. If I don't know, if Richard Branson and Alan Sugar started up a new business, it wouldn't have a track record, but look at the people behind it. It's the same principle here. If you're a new organisation, then if you've got a chair or a secretary or whoever is on the board, or volunteers that have got skills and experience in that area, you need to detail that in your application. So third point, don't be a quitter, keep at it, because the longer you do it, you're more likely to succeed. Try to work in partnership with others whenever possible, because I haven't really talked about this today, but again, this is a good way to move forward, working in partnership with others. And finally, one good bid could pay off. So you never know. And, the more you do this, the more likely you are to get some success. So there we are. There's our funding guide. We've got a number of things we can share with you and support with you. And we also do coaching for people as well, either online or in person. So I'm going to stop the share there because you'll get an email afterwards. So I will, because we've run over time a little bit, but I have got through all of it, which is good. So thank you for persevering with me today. Does anybody want to ask me any questions? If you can stick your hand up either directly or with the yellow hand. Now, let me just check the chat. This is usually what happens on this, because there is a lot to take in here, but it's not rocket science. Anybody can do this. If you persevere long enough, I guarantee you can do it. So I think I've been talking for an hour. My voice is going a bit, so I'm going to hand over to Lucy now. If you want to say something, Lucy, and I will mute myself.
Hi, Gary, thank you so much for doing this. It's been really, really good. There's lots of thank yous in the chat box that are coming through, and everyone's been really, really lovely. So thank you. I'm just quickly going to say that we're looking at doing another funding forum in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So that will just be, we do that in partnership with our Lancashire, and that's just going to be running through some different funding pots, much the same as what you've done today on some of your slides, Gary. So if anyone wants to join that, I've just
Sorry, you've muted yourself, Lucy.
on Fridays we do Funding Friday. I've just chucked my email address in the chat box, but on Connect My Community NHS, which is the link that I've put under my email address, we do Funding Fridays. So we do put some different funding pots that people could apply for on there. So it may be worth joining that if anyone on here hasn't already done so. But that's everything from me, really.
Thank you, Lucy. I would just like to say that there is a recording of this on our YouTube channel, and all the details are on the presentation I'm going to send you next. But if you go onto YouTube and look for CNT, Charlie Knows Tango, CNT Associates, it will be there. And there is a 1 hour recording of this that is there. But you will also get after this a free copy of summary presentation. If you want the full one, you will have to buy it because it's a lot of work has obviously gone into this. And we also give you some other documents, but you will get the free one, which is 20 or so slides. And I've enjoyed doing this today. It's good to do something for my home patch, because I raise lots of money for organisations based in London. Nothing wrong with that, but charity begins at home, as they say. So I'll be delighted to see you again. And I've said to Lucy, I'm probably going to do this, if she'll agree, on a quarterly basis. So I hope to see some of you again soon. Okay, well, thank you for that. And please keep in touch. We've got all our resources out there, and you'll get an email shortly. And you're on our mailing list, so you will get information about many of our other presentations, which are free. And we've got some very interesting ones coming up in the next few weeks. So thank you for listening today, and I look forward to seeing some of you again soon. And take care, and I hope your projects succeed. Thank you.